Granblue Fantasy Versus had a bit of a rough launch, coming out right at the start of 2020 in the heart of a worldwide pandemic, with no rollback netcode to support its online scene and very limited opportunities for offline locals. Couple this with being a virtually unknown franchise outside of Japan, and the whole thing seemed like it should have been doomed for failure. Yet, it's managed to hold on to a very dedicated fan base and was successful enough to warrant an overhauled version of the game set to release later this year. I've always been interested in this due to how oddly and differently it seems to handle its rules as a fighting game, and I'm glad I finally took the opportunity to delve into it further and figure out exactly what I like about it. Presentation-wise, this is one of the best looking fighting games out there, at least as far as this 3D anime art style goes. I'm not sure if I want to say it outright looks better than Guilty Gear Strive, but it certainly does give it a run for its money. Character movements and attacks are distinct and fluid, and there are so many animation details that I love. You can really feel how intense the explosion is from Charlotta's noble execution super move due to how her dress violently blows in the wind. The backgrounds are beautiful too, and there's a really neat effect in most of the stages. If a match goes into the third round, then a stage transition occurs. Not a big deal, and not nearly as rad as Guilty Gear Strive's wall break, but it is a really cool idea. Now, the music, it's nowhere near as good as the library in Guilty Gear, but it is up there. A good variety of tracks, and none of it sounds bad. Most of them don't have vocals, but I really dig the few that do. Granblue's definitely not slacking in audio. It's a great soundtrack. This next point is probably going to come off as really superficial, but I feel like it can make a big difference for fighting games. The character interactions here are unique for every matchup, and they're all awesome. The pre-battle and post-battle dialogue teaches you so much about everyone's personalities and relationships in a quick, efficient, and fun way. I knew absolutely nothing about Granblue before playing this game, and I feel like I've gotten a pretty good crash course on every character just from playing the arcade mode as everyone. With my favorite character, Charlotta, for example, she has an inferiority complex over her height and hates it when she's not taken seriously.
Cagliostro's almost jealous of how cute and little you are. You boorish knave! My body is a well-honed weapon, tiny frame or no.
However, she can also be naive and doesn't realize it when others are actually making fun of her, like offering what is essentially this world's version of a McDonald's Happy Meal.
Hey, Charlotta! I can see that hungry look in your eye. How about a little Skyfarer's lunch? Only if you beat us.
You would treat me to such finery? Then in return, I shall give this battle my most noble performance.
A lot of this is surprisingly well written, and I can tell that a lot of thought and care went into this stuff. Even Lunalu, the random select character, will have different reactions depending on who she's representing. Compared to Guilty Gear Strive, so few characters have unique interactions and instead cycle through a list of random generic dialogue, which sometimes doesn't even make sense.
I'll do my best, Johnny.
Have you been practicing that one?
It's especially depressing when characters who do have a history with each other in the lore, like May does with Faust, Chip, and Bridget, isn't acknowledged in-game at all. This is a smaller detail that doesn't mean too much in the grand scheme of things, but I really appreciate how Granblue goes about this.
That tasty little critter safe for now. Hey boys! Y'all wanna go slime hunting with me?
Huh? What? Did she say tasty? You can eat those slime buckets?
No way, dude. She meant you can blast them for major EXP. Want to try it?
Wait, what day is it? Let's drop by Sierra's and count up journey drops. Okay, hold up. I'm pretty sure you broke one wall too many there, bro. But who cares, cause... it's Granblue, baby!
Believe in victory.
Presentation-wise, I'd say it's pretty high marks all around. Looks good, sounds good, and is overall a pretty cool game. But it's the gameplay that's the most interesting aspect. As a fighting game, Granblue twists the genre's standard rules in a clear attempt to make itself more accessible, but it still manages to preserve its depth and reward the better player. Like some other ArcSystem Works fighting games, there is an auto combo system, which I usually don't like. In Persona 4 Arena and Dragon Ball FighterZ, I feel like these auto combos go on for too long, and the fact that they end in a super move is far too powerful, in my opinion. Even if the damage is significantly scaled down, I still say it's too much and too easy to finish off an opponent by simply mashing your lightest attack button. Like, don't get me wrong, those games are fine, but auto combos never really sat well with me. With Granblue, auto combos are only a total of 3 hits, and it doesn't lead to anything on its own. The idea is that the auto combos are mainly designed to make hit confirms easier. You still have to actually do the special and super command inputs to link everything yourself, but the auto combos are a nice way to make that a little bit easier. It's simply a small helping hand without having the game take over entirely. On top of that, if you decide not to rely on auto combos, then you can potentially do a lot more damage with fewer hits. Although this is much more difficult, but rewarding if you get good at the game. While Granblue is essentially a 6-button fighting game, it spreads out the buttons in interesting ways. You have light, medium, and heavy for your 3 main attacks, and the unique button does, as the name suggests, something unique for each character. For Percival, it's a 1-button command grab, and Soares puts him in a hyper armor state that he can counter out of. Perhaps strangest of all for this kind of fighting game is a dedicated block button. While this is held down, you don't have to worry about any left-right mix, although you'll still need to appropriately block high or low, and you're still vulnerable to grabs. Pressing back in block will perform a spot dodge, similar to Super Smash Bros., and pressing forward in block gives you a special dash that allows you to go through most attacks. So while it seems like there's a lot of buttons to keep track of, you only have to worry about light, medium, and heavy, and the rest are mostly situational. The last button is easily Granblue's most defining feature. The skill button allows for a shortcut input of every character's special and super command. Instead of attempting a quarter circle or Z motion input, you can instead perform a reversal uppercut at the press of a button. In most games, this would be broken as all hell, but Granblue balances this out in a couple of ways. The shortcut versions usually deal less damage, but more importantly, every special attack has a cooldown. If the light or medium version is used and the proper special command is inputted, then no cooldown is applied at all. Heavy versions are much more powerful and always have a cooldown applied, but the time for all cooldowns are significantly lengthened if the shortcut is used. So while you can get a 1-button reversal uppercut, you'll need to deal with losing that move entirely for several seconds. And this, of course, opens up risk versus reward strategies to consider in the middle of a match. Really good players will keep an eye on not only their own cooldowns, but their opponents as well, to know when it's safer to apply pressure. This also goes along with the combos being surprisingly tight to implement. There is a very small input window to go from a normal attack or an auto combo into a special attack. But buffering the input in between the second and third hits of the auto combo helps a lot in this regard. Or you can take the compromise and go for the shortcut input. It's clear that some thought went into balancing this stuff, and it makes for a pretty interesting dynamic. Now, I'm not saying it's anywhere near as difficult as Street Fighter IV with its one-frame links, but I don't think that's a bad comparison to make either. Unlike many other anime fighting games, there's no air dashing or double jump, or a lot of other wacky movement options that typically define this subgenre. Granblue is a very slow and methodical game in comparison to many others. In fact, even running carries with it quite a bit of risk, as you can't immediately cancel a dash and block, so it's easier for the opponent to check your movement if you're trying to quickly rush up to them. Granblue is such a unique and interesting game to me, and it manages to balance all of its rules surprisingly well. Even without things like faultless defense or advancing guard to push your opponent away, like in many other fighting games, the dodge mechanics and instant reversal specials allow you to escape from pressure if utilized properly. It's a pretty cool game, and I kind of like how all of these elements fall into place. There is one thing that irks me a little bit, or at least that I don't really know how to feel about. Every fighting game has some kind of matchup knowledge to a certain degree, such as if certain attacks are punishable or not. Like, in Guilty Gear Strive, Potemkin is always scary to fight against, but a lot of it is learning and reacting to when he leaves himself open. With Granblue, it feels as if 90% of the game is knowledge checks. There are so many little things to keep an eye out for that you can't know about without studying or after a lot of practice. For example, Belial has two separate attacks where he casually walks up to you, but one of them is a parry, while the other one is a command grab. With Seox, he can either safely fire a projectile or teleport himself across the arena. This can be scary with how oppressive Seox can be, but if you're prepared for it, then you can actually punish him for doing so. If I'm not mistaken, there's a general agreement in the community that Lowain is a lower tier character, and he has one of the worst super moves in the game. But if you don't know how to deal with it, then it feels completely impossible. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you'll need to keep in mind that, at higher levels of play, you'll need to do a fair bit of studying just to stand a chance. The game modes are pretty standard fare for a fighting game these days, and should be familiar if you've played Guilty Gear Strive. Unfortunately, the arcade mode is even more bare bones than Guilty Gear Strive, with no real story behind it whatsoever, and only a simple image as an ending reward. Some of them are pretty funny, but it's still disappointing that this is all you get. It's also worth noting at this point that, even on the Nightmare difficulty, the AI is completely worthless. They often do unsafe stuff, will go through obvious patterns, and will just allow themselves to get hit by your raw super move. Even the final boss is really disappointing once you've gotten him figured out. But I suppose he's good training for learning how to perform dodges and take advantage of whiffed attacks. The mission mode is much more impressive. It's similar to Guilty Gear Strive, acting as an elongated tutorial, but I really like the additional challenges that each mission has. It's one thing to be able to punish an opponent's opening, but it's another entirely to do so while meeting a minimum damage threshold. It's a great way to hint at the player what's possible without outright giving them the answer. Same goes for the combo challenges as well. It only shows the bare minimum for completing the challenge using shortcut inputs, but doing so with proper traditional inputs is where it can get tough. Sometimes requiring you to use additional button presses that aren't displayed in order to give yourself a chance at buffering the necessary special attack. None of the combo challenges come anywhere near the level of fighting games from the previous generations, but it does a great job at getting the player started and showcasing the beginnings of what's possible. I want to give a special mention to the training mode. For the most part, it's pretty standard, and again, a lot of this would get reused in Guilty Gear Strive. But can you believe that there's actually a frame advantage indicator? Seriously, why the hell isn't this in more fighting games? Granted, it's no Mortal Kombat where the game offers really detailed information for every single attack in the game, but hey, at least Granblue is doing something here. Anyway, arcade mode is bare bones, but serviceable. Mission mode is really solid, good stuff. And training mode is a bit above average for what that's worth. But the big showstopper game mode here is RPG mode. And wow, does it suck. I was really looking forward to giving this a try because it seems like a cool idea. Take a fighting game and turn it into a beat 'em up while still retaining all the special commands and combos. Unfortunately, the gameplay lasts about 2 minutes before you get interrupted by a 10-minute cutscene and visual novel segment. And this stuff happens constantly, so you can do the math and see how badly this starts to add up. I wouldn't mind it so much if the story wasn't so awfully boring, but good lord, nothing happens for extended periods. It just reuses the same excuse over and over. Some mysterious force is messing with people's memories to make these characters fight each other. That's it, and it gets old fast, but is stretched out for hours. Admittedly, towards the end, and mostly in the post-game chapters, the story does start to go in a more interesting direction, but it's too little too late at that point. It does have its moments throughout, some of them really cool, and some of them pretty funny.
I want to apologize for what I said to you earlier. I'm truly ashamed.
No, you were right. I am a machine. I am not beautiful.
That's not true. You're very cute and charming. You are beautiful.
I am?
Your innocence, your sweetness, they speak right to my heart. Metal or flesh, it makes no difference to me. So I have to ask you, will you do me the honor of going out with me?
Why, of course I will.
Gotta admit, didn't see that coming.
But for the most part, it's really miserable to sit through this stuff. And to make matters worse, the gameplay isn't even good either. It's really boring and mindless. You just mow down brainless enemies without a second thought and breeze through the whole thing. There's even this equipment aspect to the game, which is where the RPG part comes in. You'll have to spend collected money and resources to upgrade weapons of different elements in order to have an easier chance. But I just ignored this entirely for half the game and I never had a hard time. Eventually, the difficulty does start to ramp up in a big way and you'll have to start paying attention to your equipment. But it's very questionable how much of this actually has to do with skill. The boss fights against other characters are the worst, as they'll have an arbitrary amount of hyper armor at any given time, and the later opponents are so aggressive and will muscle through your attacks that you just have to get lucky and hope that you can stagger them a little bit. It's such a lame way to design these bosses, and it's never fun, neither when they're passive nor when they're aggressive. I will say that the major boss fights against the giant enemies are really cool. It's got an MMO feel to it, with pattern memorization and danger zones to look out for. I like it, but these fights are few and far between. I should also mention that you can play most of RPG mode in either local or online co-op, which would be neat if it was actually fun to play, but it is nice that the option is there. I mean, good luck finding anyone online these days, but maybe that's for the best because the online netcode? Oh boy. You know, I might be too harsh with this. Maybe Granblue's online isn't actually that bad. Like, I still do remember how rough Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was on the PlayStation 3. It's just that, after Guilty Gear Strive, I can't go back to delay-based netcode, there's just no way. Couple that with how precise some of the combos need to be, and how many situations depend on reacting to certain attacks and movements, delay-based netcode is simply unacceptable. I've got a buddy who lives easily about 1,500 miles away, and I'd say that our online connection is just barely manageable. And I mean, it's rough to the point that you couldn't take the fight seriously in the slightest. God forbid that you want to connect with someone who lives further than halfway across the country. At that point, it's literally unplayable. And that's to say nothing of Wi-Fi connections or questionable internet speeds. Basically, I'm arguing that playing against strangers is pretty much worthless. Now, if you have a friend that at least lives in the same state, maybe you've got a chance, but I still wouldn't recommend it. Same goes for playing co-op, by the way. The host player seems to have it just fine, but the delay for the player joining them is not good. It's a real shame because I like this game a lot. The rules are interesting, unique, and very accessible. The mission mode and training modes are solid and very well done. And simply controlling this game, even playing against a mindless CPU opponent, is pretty fun. Unfortunately, most of the meat of the game is severely lacking. RPG mode takes way the hell too long to get going, and once it does, it only becomes cheap and even more tedious. The big bosses are cool, but they're simply too few and far between. And the online? It hurts me to say, but don't even bother. Delay-based netcode is terrible. If you've got a local fighting game scene or some like-minded friends who live nearby, then yeah, I totally recommend it. I think Granblue is awesome as a fighting game. But my real recommendation is just to wait for the recently announced Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising later this year. It's supposed to have rollback netcode and crossplay, so it's sounding like it'll solve some of the major complaints right off the bat. The single-player content will likely continue to be lacking, but hey, the foundation of the game should still be great. I'm really hoping that Rising turns out to be good.
Will I ever reach the summit? That settles that.
Thanks for watching my review on Granblue Fantasy Versus.